So hello, everybody. Welcome to the fourth edition of the conferences En Thérapie de l'Avenir. I'm starting the session in English to draw your attention, dear participants, dear students, to the fact that these sessions are bilingual. So both French-speaking and English-speaking students are welcome to participate and to listen to the language that they are most familiar with, whether it's English or French, but also to listen to a bit of the other language, whether it's French or English. So, je vais continuer en français. Nous aurons des moments d'intervention en anglais, d'autres interventions en français. Et donc, à nouveau, je vous souhaite la bienvenue dans cette quatrième séance des En Thérapie de l'Avenir sur le thème, cette fois-ci, donc, dans la question provocatrice que nous posons, c'est sommes-nous, nous, entreprises occidentales ou européennes, has-been face aux entreprises chinoises. Dans les En Thérapie de l'Avenir, on ose des questions qui obligent à réfléchir loin. Et donc, on est assez provocateur dans nos questionnements, mais le but, c'est d'aller plus loin dans la réflexion. Donc, cette séance est en réalité dédiée à une réflexion sur les modèles d'organisation, en partant de l'idée que c'est peut-être en Chine aujourd'hui que c'est intéressant de regarder quels sont les modèles innovants en matière d'organisation. En tout cas, c'est une direction dans laquelle il est intéressant de regarder, dans laquelle on ne regarde peut-être pas tout à fait assez, puisque voilà, on a des relations occidentalo-chinoises qui ne sont pas très bonnes et qui font qu'on ne s'intéresse peut-être pas toujours bien à ces aspects, même si dans le domaine de l'entreprise, c'est particulièrement important de le faire, d'aller voir ces entreprises. Alors, ces séances, comme vous le savez, sont dédiées à l'avenir. Donc, bien sûr, là, on va parler au présent, les entreprises chinoises, comment elles fonctionnent actuellement. Mais on aime bien dire, nous, en anticipation et dans ces séances, que l'avenir est souvent déjà présent. Il est souvent déjà au présent, l'avenir, mais c'est inégalement réparti. Et donc, on se demande, c'est une hypothèse qu'on a, si effectivement, on n'a pas des modèles d'organisation pour notre avenir qui sont déjà présents, peut-être en Chine. Mais voilà, c'est ça qu'on va essayer d'évaluer. Qu'est-ce qu'il y a qui est spécifiquement chinois? Qu'est-ce qu'il y a qui est spécifiquement innovant et qui nous concerne aussi, qui concernera peut-être nos entreprises européennes et occidentales demain? Donc voilà, donc nous allons parler modèle organisationnel chinois. Je vais vous présenter nos intervenants tout à l'heure. Mais l'aspect que j'ai trouvé très intéressant, nous avons eu, vous vous rappelez, lors de la deuxième séance des En Thérapie de l'Avenir, nous avons beaucoup travaillé sur ce monde VUCA. Et c'est très intéressant, vous allez voir que Sandrine Zerbib et Aldo Spaanjaars, nos deux grands intervenants, montrent combien les entreprises chinoises évoluent depuis 30 ans déjà dans un monde VUCA, avec lequel ils sont très familiers et dans lequel finalement les entreprises se sont formées.
C'est pas un cours, c'est des conférences.
Alors là, il va falloir, je laisse... S'il vous plaît, voilà, il faut couper les sons. Donc, les entreprises chinoises sont certainement déjà aujourd'hui adaptées à un monde VUCA, alors que les nôtres sont en train de découvrir l'expression monde VUCA, de ce monde complexe, volatile, incertain et ambigu auquel il faut donc maintenant s'adapter. Donc, c'est en ce sens qu'il y a peut-être un léger décalage temporel et avec une légère avance des Chinois ou de l'Asie d'ailleurs, de manière plus large. Mais là, on va regarder spécifiquement dans les entreprises chinoises. Alors, l'idée de cette séance, c'est bien sûr pas forcément de se dire qu'il va falloir devenir chinois nous-mêmes, mais en tout cas, regarder de près tout ça et voir comment on y trouvera inspiration pour les entreprises de demain, de notre côté à nous. C'est aussi, en thérapie de l'avenir, on aime bien dire que s'ouvrir à l'avenir et à la temporalité demain, c'est aussi, ça nous oblige à nous ouvrir aussi spatialement, donc s'ouvrir au monde, regarder dans les différentes directions vers, nous, bien sûr, l'Europe, les États-Unis, mais aussi les puissances émergentes et les grandes économies émergentes pour être bien ouvert à la réalité mondiale qui aujourd'hui est très riche avec beaucoup de choses différentes qu'il faut regarder pour bien comprendre ce qui se passe. Alors, pour aborder cette question, nous avons un magnifique panel très international. Vous allez voir, nous avons, comme d'habitude, à la fois des étudiants, des extérieurs, un intervenant que vous connaissez de l'INSEC. Et tout ce monde-là représente des nationalités très diverses. Vous allez voir qu'on a des intervenants français, néerlandais, américano-colombiens, italo-congolais, sino-malaisien, et je suis ravie effectivement de mettre ainsi en valeur toute la diversité que l'INSEC, qui est caractéristique de l'INSEC et qui est vraiment une des richesses très caractéristiques de notre école, que je trouve que dans cette séance en particulier, on va la voir. Donc, nous allons, donc nos grands intervenants, vous connaissez le format, hein, les participants connaissent bien notre format. On a d'abord des petites interventions plutôt d'étudiants, et puis ensuite, dans une dizaine de minutes, nous écouterons donc nos deux grands intervenants, qui sont Sandrine Zerbib et Aldo Spaanjaars, qui sont les auteurs de ce livre Dragon's Tactique, dont on vous a déjà beaucoup parlé, et donc ils vont nous présenter de près tout ce qu'ils ont appris en 30 ans tous les deux d'expérience de l'univers corporate chinois. Et puis, nous aurons ensuite Denis Contreras, donc enseignant à l'INSEC, qui travaille également avec des entreprises chinoises et qui pourra nous donner un petit complément, son angle à lui sur ces modèles-là. Alors, donc je vais donc passer la parole maintenant. J'ai dit, on commençait par nos petits étudiants. Pas petits, nos étudiants, excusez-moi. So I would like to present you briefly donc Sarah Bagora et Li Ching Lim, who are both students in M1 at INSEC, and who agreed to make a little presentation. So Sarah Bagora is Italo-Congolese, which is already very interesting, and has studied Chinese. So we want to hear what they have to say on why she chose this language. And we have Li Ching Lim, who is in France, but who is Malaysian of Chinese origin, who will also was willing to answer that question, which introduces a little bit to our topic, which is there such a thing as a Chinese dream? Of course, you hear that usually the expression is used for the American dream. Is there such a thing as a Chinese dream in today's youth? In today's youth heads. And so Sarah and Lee are going to answer that question. And I would like, first of all, to give the floor to Sarah. Sarah?
Hi, I'm sorry for the noise here. So my name is Sarah. I'm 24 years old, and I'm a former student of international relations, and I studied Chinese for 3 years. During my studies, I came across the concept of the Chinese dream, which was first introduced by the president of the Popular Republic of China to refer to the spread of the Chinese spirit in the world. When it comes to my personal decision of studying Chinese, I would say that the reason behind this choice are purely strategic, because I am aware that China is the second economic power in the world and is increasingly becoming attractive to people, especially young people. According to a survey, people that are between 18 and 35 are more likely to have a positive view on China rather than people in their 40s and beyond. And also, it's not only a matter of age, but also of geography and the GPA of a country. In fact, according to a survey, 7%, more than 70% of 5,000 young Africans across 15 countries have a positive view on China, and they say that China has a positive influence on their lives. So we can say that the perception of China has changed throughout the years. However, young people, when it comes to human rights, young people are still quite skeptical about China. And the great example is the fact that in my former Chinese class, which was composed by 20 people, only a few of them actually wanted to live in China, and most of them, just like myself, would rather work with China from afar or to live there for a couple of years or a short period of time. In conclusion, I would say that China, like the perception of China has definitely changed, and but in order to attract people, there that cannot only be economical results, but because young people, when they approach this different culture, want take into account other aspects like human rights and democracy and things like that.
Thank you very much, Sarah. Very good introduction. Interesting, this growing, this changing image of China among especially maybe the younger generation, which could result in some kind of growing gap between generation in terms of the perception of China, even though the political aspect is still, everybody still agrees on the fact that the political framework is not the most appealing, but the economy is unavoidable. Thank you very much. And now I turn to Lee for another angle, also youth angle. So Lee, the floor is yours.
Hello. Hi, everyone. So I'm going to try to keep it short. I don't think that the youth today has a Chinese dream, but instead maybe more of a Chinese project. A lot of the younger generations has this image of China being a very strict country. However, the youth remain interested in the Chinese market, even with the media backlashing them. And why is that? I think a lot of people have no idea how Chinese live their life. And I think people are more or less curious or at least intrigued by it. Because when you see someone successful, you want to know why and you want to know how. And there is also some questions that I would like to draw attention to my fellow European friends. China had one of the most advanced technology even when it was a communist country. For the West, not just for the West, for us, the outsider, we do not know how, and it's difficult for us to comprehend, to understand why a communist country would excel in business. And it's contradicting to every culture of the West to learn from a communist country. But think about it, Chinese belongs to one of the oldest civilizations. In fact, I think they are the oldest, and it is still thriving today. Why do you think so? I recently spoke to one of my Chinese friends. He told me that since he was a kid, they taught them in school that they do not consider themselves as a communist country. They call themselves 中国特色社会主义. So is it really communist? As far as I'm aware, the trade competition in China is very dense and cutthroat. They really are more capitalist than we ought to think. And in my opinion, an answer to my questions also, I think the Chinese is a very collectivist society. There are like all these small fishes in the ocean that swims together and they become this big giant creature. And you have to bear in mind that they have to be very disciplined, because if one swims the wrong direction, then hundreds and thousands, millions would go wrong, because we're talking about 1.4 billion people. And today, France has a population of 68 million. That's merely 5% of the population in China. And just imagine 1.4 billion of French in the world. It will be so chaotic. Imagine the scale. The world would be in complete chaos. So instead of saying that they are very obedient or a strict society, I think how the Chinese people see it, it's more on how they work together to get to that common goal and how to achieve a collective interest. And in Mandarin, we say 不择手段, which means whatever it takes. And it's the same in the corporate world, for instance, maybe not necessarily just China, but in Asia in general. Work has no boundaries. We work weekends and there are no work-life balance. Don't get me wrong, I got offered by a Chinese boss, a company for my alternance, but I chose to work for a French company because I know what it takes to work for a Chinese company. So to my conclusion, I believe that the West holds a schizophrenic attitude to China. They're in such a love-hate relationship with it because they love how the Chinese manage to succeed and excel, but they also hate the inhuman part of it. Maybe hate is a strong word. They probably disagree, and they think they lack sympathy. They want Chinese to do something about global warming, and they want Chinese to be socially responsible, but at the same time, they want to buy all the cheap stuff from Amazon. They see it as their rival because, let's be honest, it's like a competition of who can do things better. It goes against the values the West hold, and lockdown was the fastest way to kill democracy. And it was so easy to put a lockdown on 1.4 billion people, and we couldn't even keep a 3-meter distance in Gafo. So do I think the youth today has a Chinese dream? No, I do not. And I don't think they ever will. But if I think that the world is slowly opening up to learn from the Chinese, yes, absolutely, and myself included. Voilà, so that's my conclusion.
And you say "et voilà," moreover. Thank you, Lee. Brilliant. Voilà. So thank you too for your very good introductions. And I think, Lee, you also introduced to this very organizational aspect of collectivism in China as a culture, due to a history of big human masses, demographies, etc., which of course call for different solutions and could also does provide also for these companies now a model which is particularly efficient, maybe coming from for a historical and societal characteristic. Thank you very much, Lee and Sarah. So now I turn to unless Robin, est-ce que tu es là? Because we are supposed to, Robin, are you around? Because we are supposed to have we'll have them later. Robin, Maupoux est censé... Ah, tu es là?
Je suis là.
Ah, on ne te voit pas. On ne te voit pas. Est-ce que tu as un problème de caméra? Ah non. Ah bah te voilà. Alors, je vous présente Robin, qui n'était pas encore sur notre panel. Et donc, Robin, il va présenter les résultats du quiz. C'est-à-dire qu'en amont de chacune de nos séances en thérapie de l'avenir, on a un petit quiz qu'on distribue parmi les étudiants pour avoir déjà un petit peu quelques idées sur le thème. Alors, c'est à la fois fait pour introduire la thématique auprès de nos étudiants, mais aussi c'est fait pour glaner quelques informations que Robin va essayer de nous synthétiser rapidement.
Oui, tout à fait. Voilà, quelques informations rapides par rapport au quiz de pré-conférence qu'on vous a fait circuler. Je vais commencer avec une question sur l'approche managériale des entrepreneurs qu'on vous a posée et vous êtes plutôt d'accord et vous avez répondu quasiment à égalité que c'était lié à la culture du pays et ensuite aux contraintes concurrentielles de l'entreprise. Vous avez été vraiment beaucoup d'accord sur ces deux points-là. Vous êtes aussi tous d'accord pour dire que l'objectif d'innovation managériale, c'est d'accroître l'agilité et l'adaptabilité. C'est vraiment deux termes très importants qu'on veut vous faire passer aujourd'hui dans cette conférence. Cela implique en fait l'agilité et l'adaptabilité, ça implique vraiment dans l'échange, c'est vraiment impliqué dans les changements de méthode de management. Et pour pouvoir continuer à innover, il faut pouvoir faire preuve d'agilité et d'adaptabilité. C'est ce que font très bien les entreprises chinoises, peut-être un peu moins les entreprises occidentales, mais bon, je ne vais pas trop donner d'avis. Voilà, c'est peut-être là la différence. Donc c'est très important si on veut pas perdre le fil pour pas être dépassé. Une question intéressante aussi, on vous avait posé, celle-là elle a beaucoup partagé, on vous avait demandé d'un point de vue management, pour quel type d'entreprise vous préfériez travailler. Ça a été très partagé. Bon, bien sûr, forcément, une grande majorité. Je souhaite travailler pour une grande multinationale, mais il y a ensuite pas mal les PME ou une institution internationale qui sont beaucoup revenues, même si c'est les multinationales qui ont vraiment qui attirent le plus. Par rapport aux startups, en termes de management, cela peut se comprendre. Ça peut-être pas les startups sont peut-être pas très connues pour avoir des bonnes méthodes de management. C'est pourquoi les personnes veulent se diriger peut-être vers des multinationales où cela est un petit peu plus développé. une petite question que j'ai posée aussi en rapport avec ce que dit le livre de Sandrine et Aldo, nos intervenants. À quel animal les entreprises chinoises étaient comparées? Pas mal d'entre vous ont eu la bonne réponse que c'était le loup. Pendant tout leur ouvrage, je parle vraiment que les entreprises chinoises sont comparées à des loups, ou bien les dragons, qui on parle un peu plus traditionnellement sur la Chine. Je vais finir avec une question où on vous demandait quel type de dirigeant vous pensiez être. On voulait savoir un petit peu à l'INSEC quel type de dirigeant on aura plus tard. Bien la moitié des personnes qui ont répondu être plutôt des dirigeants coordinateurs, et le reste c'est très partagé entre des dirigeants anticipateurs et preneurs des décisions. Donc c'est plutôt rassurant. Ça veut dire que les dirigeants de demain, qui sont nous-mêmes, les étudiants de l'INSEC, on est prêt à affronter ce monde entrepreneurial où tout va très vite et une seule décision peut changer. Donc voilà, maintenant je vais vous laisser avec nos speakers principaux qui vont continuer cette conférence. Merci.
Merci Robin. Alors, ce qui serait bien, c'est qu'on fasse une petite, on l'a déjà fait une fois, mais je crois que la dernière fois, on l'a pas fait, c'est de faire quand même une petite synthèse écrite qu'on postera sur Boostcamp pour que ça nourrisse un petit peu notre, voilà, tout notre travail. Merci en tout cas beaucoup, Robin. Alors, en effet, on va passer maintenant à nos keynote speakers, donc Sandrine Zerbib et Aldo Spaanjaars, qui vont donc nous parler qui vont répondre à cette question: pourquoi les entrepreneurs chinois dirigent-ils différemment et que pouvons-nous apprendre d'eux? Alors tout ça, donc c'est voilà, un travail, c'est lié à une longue expérience, un travail de réflexion qui a pris corps dans ce livre Dragon's Tactics, que donc vous avez vu, donc Robin l'a lu, moi j'ai commencé à le lire aussi, c'est absolument passionnant, donc vraiment ça déjà on ne peut pas faire autre chose que de recommander vivement à tous nos étudiants de lire ce livre. Il y aura peut-être d'ailleurs tout à l'heure un petit tirage au sort pour en gagner. On a 6, grâce à Sandrine et Aldo, on a 6 livres distribués aux gagnants d'un petit tirage au sort qu'on va faire tout à l'heure. Mais voilà, donc je vais vous présenter donc Sandrine et Aldo. Donc je vais faire une présentation, je vais parler en anglais pour présenter Sandrine qui parlera en français, et en français pour présenter Aldo qui parlera lui en anglais. Donc Sandrine Zerbib has close to 30 years of experience in the consumer business in China. She's today the president of Baozun Brand Management and the president of Baozun Europe. In the mid-90s, as the president of Adidas Greater China, she created and developed the China business of Adidas from its nascent stage to its present market-leading position before becoming CEO of Chinese group Dongxiang and eventually creating her own business in the e-commerce operation industry, which in early 2021 was acquired by China's leading e-commerce service provider, Baozun. I don't know if I pronounced that correctly, but voilà, Sandrine was correct. Thanks to her many years leading both Western, Chinese, and ultimately mixed businesses in China, she was able to observe the changes in the Chinese market and the rapid evolution of Chinese private companies. It gave her a chance to truly challenge what she used to take for granted, to analyze the pros and cons of Western and Chinese approaches to business, and to learn from the latter. En ce qui concerne Aldo Spaanjaars, vous verrez, c'est des parcours très parallèles en réalité, mais voilà, Sandrine française, Aldo néerlandais, mais qui également depuis les années 90, depuis 1992, est actif dans le monde des affaires chinois, jetant des ponts entre les cultures occidentales et chinoises. Sa vaste compréhension de la Chine et son expérience vont de la création de publicités primées à la gestion de chaînes de magasins de sport et de mode, en passant par la gestion d'investissements. Aldo dirige actuellement sa propre société en conseil, Dragon Strategy. On retrouve le dragon et pas le loup. Jusqu'à la fin de l'année 2022, il était vice-président exécutif chargé des activités extérieures chez Anta Sport, la première entreprise chinoise de vêtements de sport. Au cours de ses 25 années de carrière, Aldo a été vice-président des opérations chez Fosun Fashion Group, PDG de Lacoste Greater China et cofondateur de l'agence de publicité J. Walter Thompson Beijing. Sa vaste expérience des affaires, tant au sein de multinationales que d'entreprises nationales, lui a permis d'acquérir une perspective unique sur la manière de réussir et de rester performant en Chine. Le fait d'avoir travaillé avec certains des entrepreneurs les plus prospères de Chine l'a amené à coécrire avec Sandrine le livre Dragon Tactic, comment les entrepreneurs chinois prospèrent dans l'incertitude. Donc merci à tous les deux d'être ici avec nous ce soir et je vous passe la parole.
Good. Let
Okay.
me.
Aldo, you're going to share our
Yeah.
screen. Alors, je vais faire un mix de français et d'anglais parce que j'avais en fait plutôt prévu de parler anglais que français. Donc, si ça ne dérange personne, je vais mixer un petit peu dans la mesure du possible. Ça vous va, Marie-Hélène?
En mix. C'est bien.
So,
Can everyone see the presentation?
Yes, yes, the presentation is visible. No problem.
Good.
D'abord, je suis ravie d'être là et Aldo, je sais, est tout aussi ravi d'être là que je le suis. Et je le suis d'autant plus que tout ce que j'ai entendu jusqu'ici des uns et des autres et des étudiants qui ont fait leur présentation et du résultat du quiz me donne l'impression d'être avec finalement une audience très avertie, très connaisseuse et très bien informée. Donc, ça va être tout à fait intéressant de vous parler de notre expérience de l'entreprise chinoise. Donc, maybe we can go to the first slide. Yes, exactly. Alors, c'est vrai que les Chinois n'ont pas produit pour l'instant, et peut-être qu'ils ne le produiront pas d'ailleurs, de théorie du management très connu, comme par exemple Peter Drucker, qui est considéré comme le pape du business management moderne, ou même comme les Japonais avec le just-in-time, avec Kaizen, avec le total quality management. Tout ça, ça n'a pas été théorisé, il n'y a pas eu de théorisation de l'approche managériale chinoise. Mais en revanche, on peut vraiment dire qu'ils ont développé, les Chinois et les entrepreneurs chinois, des skills, et excusez-moi, je n'arrive plus à parler un français pur ni un anglais pur, des skills qui sont vraiment enracinés à la fois, et ça a été dit tout à l'heure d'ailleurs par les étudiants, dans l'histoire et la culture chinoise, mais aussi dans ce besoin de survie qui est né de l'environnement tout à fait particulier dans lequel ils ont créé et développé leurs entreprises. C'est-à-dire un environnement qui était extrêmement difficile, avec d'une part un consommateur qui changeait à vitesse grand V. Tout s'est fait en accéléré en Chine. En l'espace de 30 ans, on est passé d'un stade que finalement, nous, on a en Occident, ça nous a pris pas loin de 100 ans pour arriver du point A au point B. Donc, un consommateur très, très changeant, une concurrence absolument phénoménale, comme je n'en ai jamais vu ailleurs. Bien sûr, beaucoup d'incertitudes politiques, et ça nous a été rappelé récemment, surtout depuis le deuxième mandat de Xi, qu'effectivement, tout peut arriver dans ce pays. Et puis, un pays qui est à la fois effectivement très, très grand, très divers et donc très complexe à appréhender pour un entrepreneur. Donc, dans ces conditions très particulières, ils ont appris à maîtriser des skills qui, aujourd'hui, dans notre monde très instable, s'avèrent finalement très utiles. La flexibilité, l'adaptabilité, la rapidité, l'agilité, la ténacité aussi, et le goût pour apprendre en permanence. En fait, si vous regardez bien notre environnement, avant même la guerre en Ukraine, on était déjà entré, le monde entier était déjà entré dans une période de grande incertitude qui a été en fait accélérée par les ruptures apportées par la pandémie de Covid-19, mais il y a déjà toutes sortes d'autres facteurs qui nous posaient des problèmes, comme bien sûr le réchauffement climatique, la digitalisation de nos sociétés, le besoin de plus en plus important de social and environmental responsibility, les tensions géopolitiques qui ne vont pas en s'apaisant, et puis en particulier justement les tensions entre la Chine et les États-Unis qui ont créé tout cet environnement d'incertitude majeure. Et dans le monde entier, et apparemment donc non seulement dans le monde entier, mais à votre précédente session, on parle effectivement de VUCA, donc volatilité, incertitude, complexité, ambiguïté. Et ce qu'il y a de très intéressant, c'est que dans cette situation de changements permanents et finalement difficiles à prédire, les industries, enfin les entrepreneurs chinois ont beaucoup à nous apprendre pour nous permettre de challenger nos méthodes traditionnelles de management qui ne sont peut-être plus au goût du jour dans cet environnement-là et qu'il faut parfois en fait modifier en profondeur. Et nous pensons tous les deux, et beaucoup de gens avec nous, qu'il y a de quoi s'inspirer effectivement des entrepreneurs chinois. Donc, c'est un petit peu de ça qu'on voudrait donc vous parler. On ne va pas pouvoir aborder toutes les tactiques du dragon dans leurs détails, mais on va en particulier parler de la flexibilité. Donc, on a appelé « Become as flexible as water ». Le fait de prospérer dans l'incertitude, thrive in uncertainty, et les écosystèmes de l'entreprise en général. Et c'est des choses qu'on a un petit peu touchées lors de la pandémie. On a vu pendant la pandémie des entreprises essayer des choses nouvelles, comme par exemple les brainstorming très très fréquents pour résoudre les problèmes qui se posaient en quantité phénoménale et quotidiennement. Et puis, pour faire face aussi à l'incertitude totale sur le chiffre d'affaires et sur le lendemain. On est arrivé à des situations où on pouvait perdre jusqu'à 40-50% de son chiffre d'affaires en une semaine. Et ça a obligé certaines entreprises à faire du replanning, comme le font depuis toujours les Chinois, les entreprises chinoises. En revanche, ce qu'on voit, c'est que très souvent, ces tentatives ont été abandonnées à l'issue de la crise pandémique, alors que nous pensons qu'elles sont tout à fait essentielles au management dans notre environnement. Donc, nous espérons que ce qu'on va discuter aujourd'hui avec vous va vous inspirer pour une façon de travailler différente à l'avenir. Et je laisse la parole à Aldo, who is going to tell us about becoming as flexible as water.
Right, thanks, Sandrine. Good evening, everyone. When it comes to change, I think we are looking at one of the most fundamental differences between Chinese thinking and Western thinking. In Western thinking, time stops. However, in Chinese thinking, time never stops. Time is permanent. Think of the 4 seasons that will always follow each other, but spring will be different than the previous spring. So in Chinese thinking, time is a constant, and therefore there is constant change. And this is so fundamental that actually the first book written or known to be written in China, called the I Ching, 1,000 years before Christ, or even older, that book was already written about change. In Buddhism, in Taoism, in Confucianism, 3 very important Chinese thoughts and streams, change was always fundamental. And therefore, when it comes to running a business, the real fundamental difference is that Chinese look at running a business as of having to manage permanent change. And that means Chinese don't manage with strategic plans that we very much do in the West. As Sandrine and I always say, the only time you see a Chinese entrepreneur write a 5-year plan is when he would like to sell himself to a Western company. Why? Because Chinese are constantly looking how the world around them is changing in order to take advantage of that. We in the West think in strategic plans, but if you lock yourself into a strategic plan, you are not able to react if and when the here and now requires this. And that makes it very different. Very often we hear criticism that people say, Chinese, they don't have a vision. That is not true. Chinese don't have a fixed endpoint on a short-term scale. In fact, Chinese companies have very long-term visions. And another way of explaining the difference is think of a painting. A Western painter would probably make a sketch and then fill out the colors, whereas a Chinese painter, he has in his mind, he's going to paint a landscape, and he makes a big brush and he goes from there and he builds on this. And this is how Chinese companies think when it comes to setting visions. Company I worked for, Anta, they have one simple vision: to become #1 globally. How and when they get there, that is not set in stone in a strategic plan. Fosun, another of my employers, had a vision to provide health, wealth, and happiness to 1 billion people. Again, the way that can be interpreted can be very, very broad, as long as there's always flexibility to react in the here and now. As we only have 20 minutes today, we still want to give you some actionable results. So we have brought to you some tools that we talk about in our book in depth to help you think more. What do we mean and how do you manage with this? In order to be flexible in a business, you essentially need 2 skills. You need to constantly observe what's going on around you, and you need to have the tools that enable you to respond to this. One of the very interesting tools that we work with is the 10, 100, 1000. This is coined by Pony Ma, the founder of Tencent, that I guess we have heard of, the founder of the WeChat app. And in essence, every product manager in Tencent is required to do 10 end user surveys, to read 100 blogs, and to collect user experience of 1,000 people every single month. And that goes for everyone that has direct responsibility to product development. So that gives you a phenomenal understanding of what is happening around you. But then obviously you need to have the tools in order to do something with that knowledge. And this is where the Chinese are also excelling. In China, and I guess in your studies you've probably come across this, the Chinese economy has been really transformed from basically a poor low-tech economy in about 10, 15 years to a high-tech digital economy, very much driven by the advent of payment apps like Alipay and WeChat that really give tremendous broad data sets. And a lot of these data sets are being turned into knowledge, building, among others, on the Alibaba data bank that really shows that with knowledge you can develop a lot of new products. Another fundamental interesting thing is that between Sandrine and myself, we've never experienced more so that senior leaders in Chinese companies are very cleverly giving themselves knowledge throughout the organization by going directly to a lot of junior people. Sometimes it irritated me as a manager, but the owner would simply call people on my team and ask. And that is not because he doesn't trust me, but that is giving him a very good understanding of what's happening around the company. In order to be fast responding, well, you first need to have a system in place to share a lot of information. And this is a constant in Chinese organizations. You get inundated by new information using DingTalk, using WeChat. Another fundamental difference between how the Chinese look at things and we in the West is the way innovation is being treated. In the West, we think of innovation to go from 0 to 1. In China, it's all about incremental change and about having newness. So the speed of innovation in a Chinese company is much, much, much higher. When Sandrine and I worked at Adidas, we always had real problems trying to convince our global team to give us more innovation, and that has only accelerated in the digital economy. And of course, supply chain, you have to have a very fast response supply chain. For the sake of timing for today, I cannot go through in too many details, but I urge you to study a company like Urban Revivo, or study companies like Xiaomi and Tencent that are incredible in having very fast turnaround systems and turnaround supply chains. So, as a payoff, in order to be flexible, you have to feel the stones while crossing the water. If that sentence doesn't say you anything, Google it and learn about Deng Xiaoping, who came up with that and used that sentence to change China to what it is today. Sandrine.
Thanks, Aldo. So now let's talk about how we're going to thrive and how enterprise thrive in uncertainty. In fact, let's start with something that may surprise you. In the West, we tend to think that focus is essential and has real power. Concentration is really here to filter out the noise. So the idea is that focusing will help you get rid of all the chaos around you and really focus on what is requiring more creative and well thought out solutions to be carried out. In fact, our experience in China has told us that this is not always good advice. In some circumstances it is, but we would like to challenge this idea. And as Aldo explained, Chinese are very good observers, and they value observation skills above all others. In other words, they are open to the noise. They are open to the noise around them, and as great observers, they pay attention to every new trend, and every new trend is actually additional noise around them. This is how they catch opportunities. Et de fait, pardon, je suis partie en anglais, je reviens au français. Et de fait, la chance ne vient pas du ciel. En réalité, elle résulte de la capacité d'observer les situations et de réagir très en amont pour effectivement en tirer le plus grand profit. Donc, en quelque sorte, l'opportunisme est une valeur, en fait, et non pas quelque chose de critiquable. Donc, vu comme ça, le chaos, l'incertitude n'est pas forcément une source de panique, mais peut s'avérer un terrain extrêmement fertile pour l'improvisation, la créativité et l'innovation. Et donc, dans un monde effectivement très concurrentiel, avec un grand besoin d'innovation pour battre la concurrence en permanence, ça vaut le coup, en fait, de se frotter à cette incertitude et à valoriser ces observations pour en faire autant d'opportunités. Donc, une organisation qui va être ouverte à l'apprentissage de tout ce qui se passe autour et à la capacité de réaction et par une espèce de flexibilité qui est quasiment construite dans la société, qui est built-in, je n'arrive pas à le dire correctement en anglais, va avoir un véritable avantage, en particulier, encore une fois, dans un environnement qui est ultra concurrentiel. Donc, qui dit observation dit connaissance, qui dit connaissance dit capacité effectivement à saisir les opportunités, un petit peu comme l'expliquait Aldo auparavant. Donc, plutôt que de se fermer au bruit autour de soi, il faut peut-être accepter de subir l'inconfort de ce bruit et puis se doter d'outils qui vont nous permettre de tirer le meilleur parti du chaos et de l'incertitude, sans se laisser en fait prendre par surprise. Et peut-être qu'on va passer donc yes, exactly. So now let's see what are the skills. Let's again try to be as practical as possible and look at the skills that are necessary to master uncertainty. The first one I'd like to talk about, which is very related to what Aldo explained in terms of breaking the chain of command and very fluid communication, is actually brainstorming. So this is something I still experience every day, and Aldo also experienced this every day when he was at ANTA until recently. I still continue to work a lot with Baozun on various projects, and literally daily there are some brainstorming. And these brainstorming sessions are not really planned. They are most of the time called for a couple of hours before, or at least maximum one day before. And unlike what we see in our companies, in our Western companies, brainstorming is not meant to unlock creativity at the onset of a new plan or the launch of a product or a campaign or something like this. They're really meant, it's very, very grounded in reality, and they are meant at bringing together the highest level of the company and the bottom, the field people, and letting the highest level understand the field and therefore find the right solutions to all the problems that arise in daily life as we try to implement solutions. So it is actually obviously very solution driven, but once again, it's an opportunity for the big boss to remain very, very close to the field and to get some tools to observe and not to have it all sort of like lost in translation through the chain of commands. And similarly, if you look at the way in Chinese companies people communicate, it's also very fluid. It's sometimes annoying. You would like sometimes to have something a little bit more structured, because what you're going to see is that on WeChat work, on TikTok, people create groups all the time, and these groups change. You know, they add one person, they remove another person, etc., etc. And there may be in the group very high-level senior people and very sort of like junior people, and they keep communicating through very short messages so that everybody is aware of what's going on. This is typical of this way of working. Another tool which is very characteristic of Chinese companies is the replanning process. And here I think that not only Chinese companies in general have become expert at this, but I think one has even theorized their ways of replanning, and this is Alibaba. Alibaba has actually decided that replanning was essential in the environments in which they work, and they actually decided that instead of being locked in a plan that is a one-year plan, they actually have a 4-step replanning process, out of which I'm not going to go in the detail because we are constrained by time. But what is interesting is that out of these 4 steps, 2 of them are very consumer-centric. 2 of them consist in collecting new information from consumers and updating feedback from consumers. Another interesting part of these different steps is how you form the teams and how for each new plan you actually appoint a champion for the opportunity, as well as a supporting team. And this supporting team is not necessarily a team that corresponds to a specific spot in the org chart. It can be really, it's a flexible team. It's really about managing by project, like we see sometimes in some startups in the West. So that was the second tool I wanted to talk about. And the third one, which might be even more surprising, if not even shocking sometimes in the West, and at least difficult to accept, is internal competition. The use of internal competition is very well established in China. And the first...
Depuis le Canada?
Pardon? Sorry. So going back, I was saying that the use of internal competition is very well established, and it's sometimes even sort of like built in the company. So one very, very famous example is how WeChat was finally chosen as the tool to develop by Tencent, making Alan Zhang, who was leading this project, the winner. But he was actually competing with 2 other teams within Tencent who were pursuing very similar goal, but he was the winner. So that's one example. Another example I'd like to mention is actually the Xipei Oat Noodle Village. It's actually a restaurant chain from Inner Mongolia, where they give a lot of power to their divisions or to their departments. If it's not departments, it's really to their store managers or the group of store managers. So it's organized by geography, but at the same time, there is no exclusivity on a specific geography. You can have 2 teams competing for the same geography. At the end of the day, it's the best performing team that will win. And not only they will win and win in the serious way, in the sense that they get some dividends from the unit they are in charge of, but the bottom 30% will actually be, basically they will be the license to operate will be taken away from them, and only the people who were operating in this bottom 30% would be reallocated to other teams. So you can see that it's really quite extreme. Another extreme way, which I find it interesting, is what we call the amoeba style, which was actually really pushed to the extreme by Handu Ishe, which is an online apparel company that had decided to organize the entire company in units of 3, which is quite unusual and different from our thinking. And then if I go one step further, if you think of a group like Haier is a very famous group because they have business all over the world. They are actually the world leader and largest home appliance giant, and with a very, very innovative and visionary founder. He has decided to reorganize his company into a myriad of, when I say myriad, it's several thousands, mini companies that all report to him. But inside these mini companies, they have extreme autonomy, actually. So this model has not yet proven fully successful, but the mere fact of thinking and working along these lines is actually very interesting and opens new doors to our thinking about management in the future and how to bring back entrepreneurial spirits in companies. So that was all about controlling chaos. I think the other set of skills that we can talk about is more about how to deal with testing, failing, and improving. So one thing I would say is that Chinese are very natural adopters of design thinking, which is typically a process which would typically prioritize the consumer needs above everything else, and which employs an iterative.
We lost you, Sandrine, so you will have to.
Is a perfect example because this is how they work. Xiaomi would typically design something, start something, produce it at a very small scale, and then test the consumers. If it's well received, they will improve the product, and then they will produce bulk. So that typically leads to what we call the 80-20 rule, whereby basically you don't want to be a perfectionist. You want to launch something first and improve it later based on consumer feedback. And this is what Chinese companies are excellent at. What's interesting is that it's tech companies, apparel company, which is really almost the opposite of tech companies, do this a lot and are really winners in supply chain and reactivity because this is the way they work. So learning and scaling based on your learning from the markets is really the way they work. So again, these are just a few of the many tools that are used by Chinese companies to try and control chaos and to thrive in uncertainty and make the most out of it instead of being under panic-stricken, basically. Now, Aldo, entrepreneurial ecosystems.
Exactly. A third topic for this evening, indeed, is the way Chinese companies are organized. Again, very different to what we are used to historically in the West. Western companies are organized from the CEO, and then we have different bureaucratic layers. We have specialist departments. It is all very much structured, and it is all very much with layers. Very often, you can actually hide as an individual behind these bureaucratic layers. None such things anywhere in a Chinese company. Chinese entrepreneurs very early on realized that if they were to spend money on people, these people really have to contribute to the end result. Chinese companies are not known for being charitable. And that means the entrepreneur, the founder, wanted to have as much visibility of what was going on in the company. And the way to do that is to keep his organizations as flat and as agile as possible. So what you'll see in Chinese organizations, you see the founder will have as many direct reports. And sometimes we're talking about 20, 30 direct reports, very differently organized. But they can do that because they look for people that are entrepreneurs like themselves. They're really trying to select people that can bring the value to them rather than having to be asked to organize the value. A very big difference because both Sandrine and I have worked in foreign companies. We consult to foreign companies, and very often you hear Chinese or actually Western CEOs saying, oh, we have to become more entrepreneurial and we need to think more like entrepreneurs. And then whenever you actually bring them entrepreneurial solutions, they tend to shy away from it because they say, oh, no, that doesn't fit in the global strategy, or, oh, no, that's maybe too risky, or we have quarterly results coming up, maybe we cannot do that. So it comes down to they want to become entrepreneurial, but they do not allow their own organizations to become truly entrepreneurial. And that is very different, again, in Chinese organizations. Another fundamental difference is that in Chinese organizations, the family is still very much important. And with this, we mean family in two different meanings. One, of course, is direct family. Very often, brothers, sisters, nephews are employed within the company. But even if they're not blood related, within Chinese companies, the notion of a family feel is still very much treasured. For today, I cannot go into details too much, but Chinese leaders historically are seen as benevolent leaders. They were allowed to be leaders as long as they would look after their people. And Chinese entrepreneurs take that very, very, very seriously, even in today. And these organizations are flat and agile because in the Chinese environment, things need to go very, very quickly. Western organizations tend to be more stale, cannot move as quick as Chinese organizations can. And how can they do that? Well, they have various ways of doing that. And it starts very much with the notion of ecosystems. Ecosystems is what a lot of people in the West talk about when they talk about digital companies. But if you look at Chinese companies, it already goes back 20, 30 years ago before even we had digital companies. Because when Chinese entrepreneurs started, they knew they couldn't do everything themselves. They didn't have the money to do everything themselves. And they very early on started creating organizations that were working with them, but where they did not have ownership or where they did not make all the decisions. And Sandrine and I talk a lot about the fact that although Chinese organizations are very much top-down, driven from the top by the owner, they are actually very decentralized. So we all know in the West that Chinese organizations are much more controlled from the top. Xi Jinping obviously being a good example, but you see this all through Chinese companies. And yet they have managed to find a way to decentralize their centralized organizations. It is a contradiction in terms, but when you look at it, it's not. Because although they will always have the final say, they will always make the final decisions, they actually set parameters. And within those parameters, people lower in the organization are actually able to make their own decisions. Sandrine already mentioned the WeChat team, and I think it's an interesting team to look at. Within Alan Zhang's team, there are different departments, and all these departments are competing with each other. They can all come up with new ideas and propose new ideas, and then Alan Zhang will decide what he's going to do with it. So a lot of work is happening at a decentralized level. People can bring in their own creativity, their own thinking. As Sandrine said, they compete with each other. And yet, ultimately, the decisions are made at the top. So it can move very quickly, very agile, and yet it is controlled from the top. Another element of ecosystems, obviously, is the power of scale. I foresee that also in the West, more and more companies will start creating competitive ecosystems because it enables them to do much more, much faster in a much more flexible and increasingly uncertain world in the West as well. If you look at Alibaba, for example, Alibaba is a complete ecosystem. They have at the moment hundreds of companies underneath them. We probably have heard of Tmall, we have maybe heard of Taobao, but there is so much more to the Alibaba ecosystem. Alibaba is probably more a network orchestrator, a gravity provider today than really a company. They control the entire ecosystem into many, many aspects. A lot of the ecosystem runs on the same backbones and systems. So although there is a lot of decentralization and a lot of flexibility It is all working together as an orchestra. And I really urge you to study the Alibaba ecosystem to really learn what ecosystem should look like. Another critical example for Chinese organizations, and this is where we think in the West we can also learn from, is shared ownership. In the West, we read a lot about it's difficult to find people, it's difficult to motivate people to take low-paying jobs. There are these massive gaps between people at the top of the organization and people in the bottom of the organization. And in China, this is much more solved in a social way. And yet it is very entrepreneurial. In our book, we write about Yonghui, it's a supermarket. Here, if you go to a supermarket, the lady at the supermarket in the cheese stand, she shows up probably at 8 o'clock to do her job, and she leaves at 4 o'clock in the afternoon. And what she does is she sells cheese and she collects a paycheck at the end of the month. In Yonghui supermarket, the lady behind the cheese counter is actually an entrepreneur. She has, to a certain extent, a say in all the products that she wants to offer. The more she knows her customers, the better product she can offer them. And the higher her turnover, and everybody wins. So there's a very interesting, almost entrepreneurial notion within Yonghui where people own their own space in their own counter. Haidilao is another interesting example. It's a restaurant chain, and they have a very interesting system between mentors and apprentices, where the apprentices give all the salary to their mentors, but the mentors in change give back bonuses to their apprentices based on perceived consumer interaction and consumer happiness. So a very clear system where the master and the apprentices together deliver the best possible consumer experience. We also write a lot about Huawei. Huawei has a very interesting model where the entire company, the majority of the company, is completely owned by all staff. Hire today is about 180, 190,000 people, and there are about 100,000 people in the organization that are shareholders. And I urge you to study the ESOP model. For today, not enough time to go through that in detail. Last but not least, I want to touch a little bit on the emotional side of things. As I said already, Chinese entrepreneurs really look after their people. How about an example where you fly 6,000 people on, I don't know, 130 planes from China to France to go shopping in Galeries Lafayette, and then everybody on the boulevard in Nice was being entertained. And this is a real example where a Chinese entrepreneur flew 6,000 of his people to France for to say thank you. I want to finish this section to talk a little bit about team behavior, because team behavior within Chinese organizations is very, very, very different. In the West, if you compete within your team, you're not being seen as a team player, because the team is supposed to be working together. Well, in Chinese organizations, it's the opposite. If you do not compete within the team, you are not seen as a team player, because people that compete with each other, they bring the company to a much higher level. So in the end, the whole team and the whole collective wins. A very, very different notion on how Chinese work. Right, for sake of time, let's move on. We have one more slide, if I can. Oh, yeah, there we go. Our final slide for today is we want to leave you some thoughts as to what can you do. And Sandrine and I always talk about there are certain things you need to do immediately, and then you need to do things in a second step. But they're all so important, you should actually do them all together. So we talk about you need to do them now, and the rest you need to start doing tomorrow morning. The things you can do now is the 10, 100, 1,000 notion. Understand your consumers. Brainstorm, brainstorm, brainstorm. You can do that, and you need to do it a lot more. Start thinking in vision and not in strategic planning. Yes, milestones are important, but if you have a replanning process, you can be much more flexible in the way to try to get to your vision. Do a lot more with data and turn the use of data into an ability to be ultra consumer focused, because in a VUCA world, the more you know about your end user, the more your products are optimized, and therefore you will win. Replan, replan, replan. take in new information because the world is changing fast. If you focus, you miss opportunities. And last but not least, and if you go back to how Chinese think and are, be as tenacious and flexible as you can be. Sandrine, the end spurt for you.
Is tomorrow morning, if not now, try to think of every possible way of bringing back entrepreneurial spirit in the company. This is really a big issue of the multinationals that have really sort of gone very, very far from entrepreneurial spirits. Part of this, we believe, is really also to bring back some true emotional bonds between people in the company that are not just posters on vision, values on the walls, but are truly family feelings that the foundation for true emotional bonds between people that makes them more enjoying being together and therefore and think big. Think big means have a vision. I mean, let's not hesitate to really think big about what the company will be in 10, 20, 50, 100 years from now. Think ecosystem, as Aldo tried to explain, but this is really something that is very specific to China. I haven't seen it anywhere else and is extremely efficient. Learn how to deal with chaos and be much more entrepreneurial in your way of approaching remuneration. It's not just about pay for performance with percent, usually a small percentage of bonus at the end of the year. It's really give people skin in the game when you let them work in your company. So that's what we believe are the key elements of how to deal with the VUCA world. And from here, I guess we're going to have a bit of time for Q&A.
Merci beaucoup Sandrine et Aldo, c'était absolument passionnant avec beaucoup d'éléments. Hein. Donc nous allons voir si nous avons quelques questions. Et comme le temps commence à courir, on s'est demandé pendant que vous parliez si on n'allait pas quand même laisser Denis Contreras parler avant et faire les séances de questions juste après. Denis, j'espère voilà, qu'il y aura le temps. Moi, je voudrais... Alors, on va quand même... Saba va faire un petit intermède autour du tirage au sort. Donc, Saba, est-ce que tu peux nous en parler rapidement? Moi, je reviendrai avec une grande question que j'ai pour nos intervenants. Et puis, on verra s'il y a une ou deux questions intéressantes à transmettre à nos intervenants.
Ok, alors, je ne sais pas si vous me voyez là?
Oui, on te voit.
Oui.
Ok, alors attendez. Je vous partage. Bonjour à tous, bonjour à tous les étudiants qui nous suivent. Merci à nos speakers du jour, c'était très intéressant. Et pour les plus chanceux d'entre vous, on fait un petit giveaway, un petit concours pour tenter de remporter 6 exemplaires du livre dont on a tant parlé aujourd'hui, donc Dragon Tactics. Pour participer à ce concours, c'est simple. Je vais mettre une petite question dans l'onglet giveaway, dans l'onglet Q&A ou Q&R, ça dépend de la version que vous avez, à laquelle il faudra répondre et on fera un petit tirage au sort à la fin de la conférence. So now I will explain it in English. So for some lucky one today, we'll have the chance to win some copies of the book Dragon Tactics by our speakers of the day. And to participate to the giveaway, you will just have to comment a question that I will upload on the Q&A Anglais. Sorry, I don't know how to say that in English. But yeah, so you will have to respond to that question and the winner will be contacted by the end of the week, I guess. So thank you to everyone. And I will upload the question right after.
Ok, merci beaucoup Saba. Alors pendant que donc il y a ces éléments-là qui vont passer. Moi, je voudrais revenir très rapidement, après on verra s'il y a des questions, mais je voudrais revenir quand même sur... Enfin, j'ai une question, remarque, question. J'ai beaucoup entendu ce que vous disiez sur le fait que les entreprises chinoises, celles qui marchent en tout cas, ce sont des écosystèmes d'entrepreneurs avec beaucoup plus d'accent sur l'esprit d'entreprise chez les employés que dans nos cultures à nous d'entrepreneurial. J'avais d'ailleurs entendu parler d'études qui avaient été faites qui regardaient les qualités, les spécificités des profils typiques dans les entreprises. Et je crois qu'il y avait le profil rouge qui était plutôt le profil entrepreneur et le profil bleu qui était plutôt un profil, au contraire, plutôt plus de fonctionnaires dans l'idée de plus exécutant que dirigeants, on va dire, qu'entrepreneurs. Et en fait, nos entreprises sont pleines de profils bleus apparemment. Et si j'ai bien compris, il faudrait qu'il y ait plus de profils rouges, ce qui se fait en Chine. Alors du coup, je me demandais si... est-ce que vous sentez qu'une des différences quand même fondamentales, ce ne serait pas une question de confiance? Est-ce qu'on n'a pas, nous, dans notre système occidental, corporate et en général d'ailleurs, un problème de manque de confiance finalement dans les individus qui fait qu'on les cadre énormément et que du coup on perd cette énergie créatrice dans laquelle peut-être les entreprises chinoises miseraient plus? Est-ce que donc vous voyez plus de confiance au cœur du modèle organisationnel chinois? Aldo, did you get the answer in English? Bon.
Let me give it a
Sandrine,
try.
but Sandrine otherwise can answer.
I understood the question.
Yeah.
En fait, je pense que pas vraiment, parce que I think, in fact, China, not just Chinese companies, is probably one of the places in the world where trust is at the lowest. China is not a trusting society. On the contrary, and to some extent, Western cultures are much more relying on trust than China is. But I think that there are two things. One is that the founders and the people at the head of companies in China are much more involved in everything. And because they are much more involved in everything, they don't feel so far away. So they don't need such a heavy set of processes in order to be in control. They use other tools for controlling, and the first tools they use is their ears and their eyes. That's the first thing. The second thing is that they take, I believe, calculated risks. So it's not trust. I don't think it's trust, because actually there is nothing less trusting than a Chinese to some extent, but it's much more calculated risk-taking instead of the comfort of having a process that gives you exactly what you expect. And I think openness to the unexpected is probably what makes a big difference. You are muted, Marie-Hélène, suddenly.
Okay, thank you. Sorry, so thank you for letting me. Saba, do we have a question before we move on to Dennis from the students? Saba?
I think that we can move on. We have some questions, but we better...
We'd better, okay. So we'll come back on all this. So Dennis, we're listening to you now. So Dennis,
okay.
Let me introduce you briefly. So you are a teacher. Well, you are a teacher at INSEC. You have over 25 years of experience in financial services, working as a former Wall Street banker, and you have structured more than $2 billion in transaction across Latin America. You're an independent advisor. As an independent advisor, then you've been working with China and providing advice to Western clients of structuring financial transactions. You've advised Chinese investment groups as well in the past 5 years in energy and commodity business. You are the CFO of a biotech company focused in oncology and expanding in China. You're also a board member of a refinery working with PDVSA, Petroleum de Venezuela, and you have an MBA from Northwestern University. and an MS in environmental engineering, a BS in chemical engineering from Manhattan College. You're all that, Dennis, and you work with Chinese organizations.
Yes.
So please let us know your feeling, your your experience in this regard.
Well, yeah. Well, thank you very much, and hello everyone. And Sandrine and Aldo, you know, it's interesting to hear from your point of view, because both of you were talking about doing investments in China, and I represent investment groups that are looking to invest outside of China. So, so interestingly enough, one group that I represent, they have assets over 180 billion US dollars in Singapore, and one of my responsibilities working with them is to really work and look at the future, as you said. And they're very, very entrepreneurial, very punctual, as you said. And what I like about them is they really are, from the typical Western or the American way of thinking, is they really try to change things. And I really like that image. Now, I will say something that one of my challenges is every time I speak to individuals about doing, not individuals, but companies that I have an investment group, the minute I say Chinese, they back away. And now, you know, obviously I'm not going to say I'm the new face, but there's this image that that people are afraid, you know. And I think Raban said that, what's the image of Chinese? And you think about wolf, you know. I think Lee was talking about that they work hard. You know, my motto, what I learned in Wall Street, was time is money. And what the Chinese told me is that money never sleeps. So clearly, you know, the opportunity of learning from the Chinese, I think, you know, it's time for us. They're leaders in artificial intelligence, leaders in telecom, they're leaders in what did I say, electric cars. So really, I think it's now the time. Now, part of the reason why I want to work with them in China, and I've been working with the CEO, and the CEO is very hesitant, but I think that the opportunity, what you're saying is very true, that, you know, there's something now for us to learn from them. You know, I think we have to, you know, this old tradition of learning the strategic plan, it really is different, and we have to adapt to this to be more entrepreneurial. And it's very difficult because when you work in a big organization, and I see it here in France, it has this military way of thinking. And so, and I always tell my students, it's not about doing, it's about thinking. And thinking out of the box is my way of saying it. And I see it with the Chinese. It's just, unfortunately, I always say reputation is very important. And unfortunately, you know, it's this reputation. I'm kind of doing a little bit of cleaning up that image to show that there is opportunity, you know. And believe me, it's not as easy as I would like it to be, you know. But anyway, I don't want to take too long. But like I said, I do echo what Sandrine and Aldo are saying, that there is some tactics that we could learn, but more importantly, this idea of design thinking is absolutely important. So back to you.
Merci Denis.
Non, merci.
Merci beaucoup. Alors, moi, je voulais juste rebondir sur ce que vient de dire Denis en parlant de système plus militaire côté occidental. J'avais déjà dit dans une session précédente, quelque chose que j'avais entendu dire sur les systèmes militaires. En fait, l'armée, quand elle est pas sur le terrain, elle a ce système très hiérarchique, très lourd, etc. Quand elle n'est pas dans le monde VUCA. Et quand elle est sur le terrain, dans des terrains de guerre, des théâtres de guerre, etc., elle se met en mode, donc elle est en mode VUCA d'une certaine manière. Et en fait, les militaires sur le terrain, ils changent complètement d'organisation. Ils sont sur des modèles organisationnels qui ressemblent beaucoup plus, qui sont beaucoup plus plus plat et il n'y a plus d'aspect au contraire et qui ressemble un petit peu à tout ce qu'on vient de nous décrire. Qu'est-ce que vous en pensez, Sandrine, de cet aspect-là, effectivement, de est-ce que ça expliquerait pas que finalement, en fait, en Occident, on a aussi eu effectivement ce monde très organisé, très stable, où finalement même la concurrence était assez organisée, hein, les concurrents se connaissaient, se ménageaient, et là maintenant, on est effectivement dans un vrai monde de compétition qui nécessite de nouveaux outils. Désolée, je pose la question en français, du coup, mais je ne sais pas si Aldo comprend suffisamment bien le français, mais voilà, sinon, Sandrine, je vous laisse répondre. Sorry, Aldo, I should ask also in English, but Sandrine.
Je crois que c'est tout à fait juste cette observation. Je pense que les Chinois les entreprises chinoises sont dans un environnement où ils sont sur le terrain, ils sont ils sont en guerre en fait. Ils sont en guerre et c'est un petit peu ce qu'on dit. Enfin, c'est aussi ça qui leur donne cette image de loup, de dragon, de tout ce qu'on veut, mais ils sont en guerre permanente contre leurs concurrents, contre un État qui est parfois difficile, etc., etc. Pas contre, mais dans un environnement où le consommateur change tout le temps, etc. Alors que nous, on s'est un petit peu installé dans, il faut bien le dire, une certaine zone de confort. Et plus ça va, plus on cherche du confort. Alors que le monde VUCA, en fait, nous bouscule et nous oblige à sortir de ce confort. Et en fait, si vous pensez à toutes les formes de confort qu'on recherche, ça devient presque une maladie, en fait, cette recherche permanente de confort et de minimisation du risque. On veut pouvoir tout anticiper. On veut savoir ce qui va se passer dans la minute qui suit. On veut un plan où tout est détaillé étape par étape pour surtout ne pas avoir de surprise. On ne sait plus, en fait, fonctionner avec un environnement changeant qui nous apportera forcément des surprises. Et je pense qu'au bout du bout, le plus gros problème, c'est ça. On ne veut plus de surprises, on veut se protéger de tout ce qui peut arriver, on veut savoir à l'avance, et du coup, on ne sait plus réagir à la réalité.
Thank you. Yeah. Okay. Also, something I wanted to share, maybe in English this time, about the focus versus observation that you analyzed. Do you think the next generation, even in the West, is more prone to work like that? Because we professors sometimes criticize the fact that students are, less focused, they butterfly, we say, etc. They have, over a lot of information, etc. Maybe what we see sometimes as something as I said, we criticize, is it an advantage maybe at some point, and then the next generation could move, in fact, very easily to this kind of more agile model that the Chinese today are capable of producing? Aldo, you don't have the mic.
It's very clear, of course, that indeed in the digital world, and the current generation is much more digital than our generation. So in the digital world, you're exposed to a lot more information. So short answer is yes, they will be less focused. But of course, and what we talk about, you need to have the tools and the processes to deal with it. If you simply get inundated with lots of information, then it can basically drown you. What is so interesting about how the Chinese work, they have ways of filtering all that information. And I think the one thing that is more difficult for us to adapt to in the West, they are open to filter that information because, as we said before, they're used to change. So they have grown up from the beginning with the notion that you need to look constantly. You need to look constantly for trends and new ideas. They are predisposed, and that is a skill that we need to learn. So it's not only becoming open to it, you need to have the tools and you need to understand where you need to look. So yes, in the digital world, you will be seeing a lot more information. And I think in the West, we need to build better tools, as they already do today in China with their WeChat and with their literally, I would have a meeting with Mr. Guo, the CEO of Fosun. He did not want me to present any PPTs. He just wanted me to talk. And during the talk already, he said, oh, you need to talk to this person and you need to talk to this person. And he's sitting on his phone. And by the time the meeting had finished, probably 15, 20 minutes later, I had about 15 different WeChats in my WeChat box with either articles that he has read or people he needs to talk to. And it is that way of having to deal with that. And of course, I had to read that. But this is also what people expected from me. They expect the same from Sandrine. So you need to start building the tools, and then absolutely in a digital world, you'll have to be able to deal with more information.
All right. One last, maybe, unless Sarah, do you have questions that you'd like to share with our speakers, Sarah?
We do have maybe one question in English from Vanessa. And the question is how they manage fall in this competitive environment. And she explained more right after. And she asked, because when a team fail, what is the consequences? Because in France, it is complicated to fail and the consequences can be bad. So that's the question. Sorry.
Good question. Would you like Sandrine or Aldo?
If I understand the question correctly, what happens when teams fail?
Yeah.
Yes, that's...
Chinese organizations are relatively unforgiving, but at the same time, they are very loyal. I think Sandrine had the example of Shibei oat noodles, where they literally, it's a little bit in the thinking that GE had, where they had the ABC rating and they had to get rid of 20% of the people on a yearly basis. Shibei oat noodles, they close restaurants if they don't perform, but then they reassign the different people again. So Chinese companies are unforgiving because everybody needs to add value, and if you don't, you will be reassigned. You will not be fired. They will actually find a way for you to reapply yourself. Of course, if you consistently fail, you're still being pushed out. But the notion is everyone needs to do their thing. Everybody needs to add value. If you add value, you grow quickly, you get phenomenal remuneration. If you don't, your project will get stopped, and they will stop projects much faster than we have ever seen in the West. Unforgiven, but also very rewarding.
And also very tenacious. I think it's really part of the Chinese culture to say, okay, you failed, no problem. You just stand up and you continue walking. Yeah. When we fail in the West, we tend to feel that it's a sign of sort of almost a personal failure of who we are in depth. I think it's quite different in China. I think failure is accepted as part of the journey.
C'est super. Je ne sais pas, Sandrine, si vous avez arrêté de parler, mais c'est très intéressant sur l'échec. C'est des réflexions qu'il y a bien sûr au sein de l'INSEC sur le rapport à l'échec. On a des modèles éducatifs qui sanctionnent l'échec comme voilà, on n'est pas bon quand on échoue, alors qu'en fait on s'aperçoit dans tout ce qui est neurosciences, etc., que c'est par les erreurs qu'on apprend le plus, et que donc il faudrait mieux valoriser en fait les erreurs pour en faire effectivement. Tout le monde fait des erreurs, et c'est justement ceux qui font plus d'erreurs et donc apprennent plus. Le cerveau apprend beaucoup plus d'erreurs que de succès. Donc ça c'est intéressant. Moi j'avais une dernière petite question, puisqu'on est voilà, dans un format qui est vraiment sur l'avenir, prendre la prise en compte de l'avenir, etc. Donc à la fois on a entendu que les Chinois étaient prêts, enfin il y avait dans la culture quelque chose qui acceptait mieux les surprises, et donc il n'est pas nécessaire de tout anticiper. En même temps, on sent qu'il y a quand même une énorme orientation à venir, et que toute cette data, toute cette observation des composantes de ces écosystèmes est quand même au service d'une meilleure compréhension de ce qui se passe, de comment être, voilà, on parlait de concurrence, de compétition, être devant les autres, c'est quand même aussi avoir mieux compris plus vite ce qui pourrait arriver, ce qui est en train d'arriver. Donc, est-ce qu'il y a quand même cet aspect d'anticipation, d'orientation à venir, je dirais, de culture à venir? Est-ce qu'elle serait éventuellement plus présente, d'après vous, dans la culture entrepreneuriale chinoise? Future orientation and Chinese entrepreneurial culture.
I don't know how much Aldo has understood, so let me...
No,
but,
exactly.
Sorry, Aldo.
I apologize for not speaking French.
So, in fact, I think it seems paradoxical, but what is interesting in China is that everything is paradoxical, and that really challenges us. But it seems paradoxical. But yes, you're right that this data is really about understanding everything about tomorrow morning. But also, it's also about admitting the fact that the data will change and micro trends will constantly change. So it's not about anticipating something which is a long-term move. It's really anticipating micro trends, and micro trends change all the time. So it's to have all this knowledge in order to be able to react all the time.
Ok, ouais. Donc, très bien. Merci beaucoup. Alors, on arrive à la fin de notre séance. We're reaching the end of our session together. So I would like to thank you all for your participation, your incredible inputs. And I hope our students have enjoyed as much as I have personally. And I would like to wish you all a good evening now. It's time. And to announce that the next session will be, follow the newsletter as you do. But the next session should be on, let's again travel. I said to travel time, we need to travel space. So we're going to go towards the Middle East next time. And we are going to try to look at a city of the future, which is Neom, this city that is being built towards the border between, it's in Saudi Arabia. And we are going to look how a country that, again, we are not very familiar with is inventing the future by building a city which is a smart city and a lot more than that. So hopefully I'm working hard on trying to get very high-level speakers from actors of this project and to bring them here in front of you. So that's not yet completely sure, but it's likely to be the topic of the next session on cities of the future. Voilà, on est arrivé au terme de notre petite expédition et donc je vous souhaite à tous une bonne soirée. Je vous remercie. Saba, tu veux dire quelque chose? Oui, peut-être.
Les gagnants du...
oui, c'est vrai.
Il y a des gens qui attendent, qui sont impatients de savoir s'ils ont gagné le livre ou pas. Du coup, nos 6 gagnants, je vais les nommer brièvement et vous serez contactés pour avoir les détails de la remise du livre, etc. Un peu plus tard dans la semaine. Donc, bravo à Claire Souchère, Yasmine Bariz, je suis désolée pour les prononciations des noms, par avance, Hu Hong Nguyen, Hortense Fouché, Nour El-Houda Kachaou et Munich Aurora. Bravo à vous.
Bravo. Et merci beaucoup à nos intervenants de nous avoir permis d'avoir ces 6 livres à vous offrir. Merci beaucoup.
Merci.
Bon, donc Saba, tu t'occuperas de voir comment on organise tout ça, la distribution des prix. Okay. Voilà, bien écoutez, bonne soirée à tous. Merci et j'espère à une prochaine fois.